So I'm really excited to talk about this, and that's because I'm swimming in the sea of your middle and high schoolers, every day. And so I'm at Evergreen, but for those who are local, I probably worked with a lot of your kids because I do programming at a bunch of the charter schools and the private schools in town doing the drug and alcohol thing. But I get to drop into those communities and I stay in touch with those kids, which is a real honor that they stay in touch with me through high school and they reach out to me, and in between. So I'm hearing not just from my Evergreen kids, but I'm hearing from, kids across the community about what this has been like for them. And one thing, that I'm hearing a lot is that my parents don't know how hard this is for me. And there's a couple pieces to that. One is feeling like I don't want to burden my parents with it because they've got their own stuff going on. My dad lost his job. My mom lost her mom. They're really aware that we're, stressed and we're overwhelmed and we're having loss and grief and we're, a lot of things going on. And so they don't want to burden us with their stuff. They don't realize that's their job, and that I have to explain that, like, it's actually, we feel like we're sad when you don't share your tough stuff with us, right? Like we feel like that's we're honored to have that role, but so they don't always know that.
It sounds like there's a disconnect between, preteens, teens, and parents, and that teens are witnessing the bereavement, the losses that are big, and they know that this impacts the whole family. And so there's a sense of not wanting to be fully open about how this is for them. And and the other part is that, a lot of them don't even have the language to explain it themselves. They just feel off. They just feel anxious. They just feel depressed. They just feel lonely, but they don't even have kind of the, the EQ, the emotional, self-awareness or the language to be able to say that to their parents.
Right. Sort of is not even knowing. Yeah. And then there's another sort of subset where I see that parents aren't really aware, that they are really wrapped up in ourselves. Let me make that because let me say this. I am a parent and I'm actually parenting 2 step teens that are here homeschooling every day and have been for a year. And my own who's 22, who kind of graduated from college during all of this and ended up coming home, which was not part of the developmental stage of post-college that we pictured. Right, and so he is back living with mom, living at home, going through his own stuff related to his own natural development being kind of stunted, which is part of what's going on. So so I do think that for a lot of kids, granted, there are some kids that have just like, this is the best thing ever for them. I do find that to be the minority of the kids that, that I run across, but there are some who were socially anxious, who had, some issues with social skills or academic school just felt really uncomfortable for them in certain ways. And so being home in the safety and the coziness of a safe place, where home felt safe, they're like, this is awesome. Can I do this forever? So know that they're a subset, but they're a minority. And most of the other ones are experiencing so much stuff that I think we're often unaware of. So
the most teens right now, and when we think teens, or the age group that we're really talking about, is from ages 10 to 13 preteens, and then teens 13, 14 on up, and into young adults, right? And thinking about from their perspective, it sounds like this is really hard, and part of that is, what do we say and how do we say it? For brains that are developing, and people who are still learning how to have a feeling and communicate about it well. There's always the language or the skills emotionally to do that. And you just briefly touched on something regarding your son that I think is really fascinating. Developmentally, what would be normal for right now?
Right.
Stymied, or there's a block there because of the pandemic.
Yeah. And that's a big, huge piece of this. So you think of that whole age group. And so for me, so I work with like 10-year-olds, 5th graders through, but then again, I'm like my son's friends who all just graduated with college are also like my other kids. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so, we forget about the kids that we want to remember that the kids who graduated high school last year, who thought they were going out into the world or going out into college or going at, that everything got turned upside down for them too. Our older teens, that are kind of in that young adult category. But yeah, what you're just saying is that whether they are in 5th grade or whether they are in 8th grade or whether they are in 12th grade, is that there's been sort of the natural, the developmental stages that they're in, which are just ingrained in their DNA, is this drive to get more and more independence, more freedom, more independence from us, more freedom, more sort of more skills to do things on their own, sort of going out and sort of experiencing the world a little bit more on their own. I mean, that's increasingly, what is happening during adolescence, what's supposed to be happening during adolescence, right? And the way, and so that's been stunted, right? They're right under for a lot of us, right under our noses. Or, they're interestingly, like they're not, because it's supposed to be, what happened, in order for that to go the best, the healthiest, is that there's some scaffolding around that, right? So that, and we take the scaffolding down as they demonstrate that they have the skills to sort of manage their life a little bit more and a little bit more healthily and safely, right? And so we take that down and give them a little more room, to be independent and free, and to figure out who they are separate of us. Oh my gosh. But there's sort of like this weird thing happening where we're either up in their grill over their shoulder all the time, or we're working and they're home alone, for 3 to 5 days out of the week. So even those that are doing a hybrid thing, they're still home, most of the time. And so they're actually not getting like the scaffolding. We're either too close or too far and not guiding them.
What about that?
Yeah, I kind of just did too. So this is supposed to be happening, right? Is that they are getting their identity from other places and other activities and other meaningful, they're finding out like what their jam is and what they're passionate about and what they're good at. And some of that happens in the home still, but a lot of that starts to happen outside. It's activities that are at school. It's the extracurriculars and the clubs and the things that they start to get into as they get older, at school and after school.
I love
and the sports and the performing arts and the debate club and all that stuff, right? They find new parts of themselves and express new parts of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that missing, that's been missing for a year. And I know that some people have figured out some ways to do it. They started some dance classes up. And so they're like socially distant, with a few kids in the class, but it's still not the same thing. They're not having their spring performance with all the parents sitting in the audience. Everything is still different and still, has a sense of loss with it, right? So all of those things that were meaningful to them and giving them a sense of who they were is gone, right? As well as a sense of identity. So there's this real and then the friendships, then the social world, which is enormous. So for an 8th grader, nothing matters more than their friends and feeling connected and belonging. Nothing. And that's actually brain based, right? So there's and developmentally is that our kids are supposed to be kind of orienting. We still want them to be rooted in us, but they're really orienting increasingly in their tribe, right? They're supposed to be finding their tribe kind of for survival as they move beyond us, right? Their little pack in their village, whatever. And so when they feel rejected, right? When they feel like they don't get excluded and disconnected from their tribe, it literally is just, there's a brain thing happening. It's like the amygdala, the hand model of the brain. Yep. But it's like their animal instinct part of their brain is telling them that they are in actually a state of survival threat. And they don't know to give the words to that. They just know, I feel really off and bad and anxious and funky, and sad. But it's actually their system is telling them like, you're in danger because you're isolated, because you're not connected to.
I just want to highlight that because I think that that's such an important core concept that really shifted my awareness of understanding, a developing brain. That for kids in that age group, where biologically there's an imperative to leave the family and to be starting to build identity and tribe and connection and belonging to the home, to not be able to do that puts them in stress mode, fight or flight. Like it puts them in the brain state, more reactive and around, like flooded emotionally. That concept got, this is the prefrontal cortex and that hand model, and this is the
Mm-hmm.
amygdala and the midbrain and the reptile brain. And then when you're stressed, you don't have prefrontal cortex for self-control or
Lid flip.
for higher thinking. This is where they are. Yeah, they flip their lid. Just
Right.
that disconnection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen an interesting thing too, going on. It's been like a shifting of friendships. So again, the stability, if the stability is in your social acceptance, as we go into middle school and into high school, and there's been this difference between, so some kids have been able to hang out together, because they're in the neighborhood, or because their friends didn't have their families didn't have the same restrictions, right, on sort of social distancing. And then there's some that have had, they've been able to connect because they've had social media, or they've had certain apps, or they have phones. And then others that don't have the phones and don't have, particularly around in the middle school age.
Not that either.
Right, or haven't had the same access to stuff. And so it's really and then some, like I see a bunch of the boys more than the girls even, but that are gaming, they're connecting through their Xboxes, and so the kids that are in or out of that are in or out of the social connection. So there's been the beautiful thing has been that I have seen some of like the cliques and the things like dissolve, where people are just like so excited to connect with, the kids are so excited to connect with anybody, that they're forming friendships that they, had dismissed before. But then there's a lot of friendships that are really shifting around and really disorienting, the kids to feel that way. And
just in terms of accessibility to connecting to other people, accessibility to the technology that lets you to continue with friends in those age groups. I hadn't thought about that at all. And that's totally changing the social landscape. I love that you mentioned a positive way, where the cliques are kind of broken open and friendships that might not have happened are now happening. And then the hard way, where, what if you don't have a smartphone? What if you don't have access to some of the gaming platforms, or your internet isn't fast enough?
Yeah, and I've had kids that are like, well, my grandparents live with me. And so we're not even like, I'm not even leaving the house to protect, Nana and Pop, versus, and then they're watching their friend, they do have the phone, and they're watching their friends, get together and play on the weekends and have overnights, because they're in a bubble, or they're not caring. And that's been really hard.
That there's this idea of complicated grief that comes from, the psychological interpretation of grief. And this just sounds a little bit like a complicated form of loss.
Yeah.
To process, especially developing brain, the grief and sadness and feeling left out of watching your friend group get together when you know that you're protecting your grandparents who you care about by not going with them, but then there's still all of those feelings. That's a lot.
Right. Yeah. And there's been, there's been layers and layers of loss, of loss and grief. And, and when we feel it, whether it's like, well, I'm used to going to hear live music, or go to my favorite restaurants, or go, all those little things that, that we miss. But there's even ways that we can adjust better to that. It doesn't impact our whole sense of selves and identity quite the same way, because we're a little, hopefully we're rooted in sort of more than, our social world and our activities at this point in our lives, but that I think, using the word trauma is not over exaggerating. I mean, this has been traumatic, in that it's been like this relentless ongoing assault on all that they find, predictable and stabilizing.
Interesting.
Just sort of over and over. And so even though, yes, it's great, like the fact that restaurants have opened up to a certain extent, and their schools have opened up to a certain extent, it's still weird. It's still awkward. It's still, they're sitting there in a classroom and at the lunch table, and, 6 feet away, and not able to connect with each other in ways that feel really satisfying.
Yeah. There's so that's really hard, even when it's more normal.
Right.
I think from one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that you did a poll with some of your preteens that you're working with.
I did.
Tell me about what this is like from your perspective. Can you share just a little bit about that? Because I feel like
I will. Yeah. So, and some of this information, it was really informative to me, because I got to hear, what I had asked. So this is the kids at my school, and I surveyed them, 5th grade through 8th grade, both in like the end of September, when we were sort of just, kind of getting into all of this for this school year, anyway. And then again, just about a month ago, a little more than a month ago. And they just, what I heard is what actually, because they have had some statistics come out just recently on a national level, which showed that, ER admissions and suicidality in terms of not completed suicides, but suicide attempts, suicidal ideation, that is up 25 to 30%. They're showing in our kids and our adolescents. And it was already in some increasing crisis states over the last 10 years, right? So, so what I heard from the kids was, I'm depressed and I'm anxious, kind of describing what I know as a clinician is depression and anxiety, and probably, diagnosable levels of that at extraordinary rates. So there was about a third of the kids that identified themselves as struggling with depression or anxiety, and in a normal, if we had done the survey any other normal year, it probably would have been 1 out of 5, that might have answered to one of those. But so, I think because you add that, those traumatizing pieces, that sort of the relentless attack part with fear, because there's been fear instilled from all these directions. And even if they aren't afraid of getting sick themselves, or they're not even sure what they're afraid of, they're soaking it in from the whole society and their families, who might be more afraid than they are, right? So, just there has been, so they're saying they're struggling with these feelings that, again, they can't even necessarily sort of define, but along with the loss of their outlets, the loss of their coping tools, the things that were normally their, normally their thing, so for a lot of them, they had activities outside, or they're just getting together with their friends after school in the neighborhood, or, was one of the things that they just, they distressed from life with, and some of their normal, their normal tools are gone. So, but what I heard, Ariana, is like over and over again was, number one was that, like, our parents have no idea how hard this is. Like, I did hear that, like, this is really hard for me too, and my parents don't see that. And they dismiss it, and they mock it, and they invalidate it,
wow.
like, just like you, well, at least you don't ... or at least you have, at least when I was your age, we didn't even have the devices. We didn't, like, we do that.
You have it lucky. You can connect through Facebook Messenger right now. We didn't have Messenger when I was 8, 10.
Yeah.
And I wonder, going back to what you said at the very beginning of this conversation, the kids thinking, oh, well, my mom just lost a parent, or my dad just lost his job, internally thinking, what's going on with me isn't, like, I need to just not share it because that's bigger.
Yeah.
Parents conveying that message to kids.
Yeah. And I think because, I'm sorry.
To just really, like, what is a lacrosse team in comparison to losing a job? Like, get with it.
Exactly. Right. Is it parents are just like, well, what do you have to be so upset about? Like, you're hanging out, eating snacks on the couch with the cat, doing school from here. Like, how bad is that really? Yeah. Like, texting with your friend all day. Like, it just doesn't look that rough to me. Here I am having to deal with this, and this, So, but we'll get to that when we talk about what they're asking for from us. Right.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing I heard over and over and over again is, like, I feel like I'm under so much pressure. Like, please lighten up the pressure. So they're feeling like, between school and parents, and a lot of time from parents, it's sort of trickling down from school, or how parents are translating and conveying school expectations to the kids is this, like, expecting the kids to be, to do the normal things, to perform and be as successful by all the same standards, by the normal standards, in a very abnormal time, under very abnormal conditions, but expecting them to, do it the same way. And the kids saying, like, but this feel like you can give me the same amount of work, but it feels so much harder when, one, I'm not in a classroom of kids doing the same thing. Like, we're not all swimming in the same direction. I'm not in the sea, the waters of everybody doing the same thing, going, oh, cool. Okay. Hey, what did you get? How did you get that answer? But of just the positive peer pressure, the flow of that.
Yeah.
right? They're not able to just be like, hey, teacher, I don't get this. Hey, can, and have the teacher just pat them on the shoulder to be like, you got this. I know, during the test, just like, breathe, you're good. Like us teachers are great at doing, right? That's social emotional support as they go.
That's great.
Yeah. And so instead they've got this whole other, the environment around them pulling on their attention span. We know we can relate to this more than we're acknowledging, right? Is that delineating school from home, is now, there's no line, and that's really hard. But yeah, so it's that pressure piece of feeling like they're feeling like, not only is school harder for a lot of the kids, but it's missing all the good parts. You ask kids why they go to school. Most of them, it's like, if they love a class, they love a class because it's engaging, often because it's hands-on, because there's some cool project, there's some cool field trip, right?
All their friends are in that class.
Their friends are there. The magic happens at like lunch or recess, or, so you're not getting like, oh, my favorite part of school was sitting there and listening to my teacher. Like, I've never heard a kid say that in my 20 years of school counseling, right? And that's what they have now, is almost 99% of the parts of school that weren't enjoyable to start with. Right?
Okay, so to recap what you just said, because that was a lot of information to be thinking about. Kids right now are feeling like it is so much harder than their parents realize, and that was not being heard. It's being made fun of or belittled or just brushed off in light of the other challenges that the family is facing, that the adults are also contending with. And that on that, there's so much pressure right now on kids, and so much of a push to just keep performing like they always have been, to keep getting A's, when nothing is like it was when they were maybe getting A's or B's or C's or whatever.
Yep.
Everything has changed. And in fact, the structures that were in place that helped them to perform well are gone. And what's left is staring at a Zoom screen for hours and hours and hours, and listening to the teacher without the positive social reinforcement of other kids paying attention, without maybe the fun school activities they looked forward to, without the pat on the back from the teacher saying, hey, you got this, you're good.
Right.
All of that is gone. And instead they're struggling in a new, unpredictable, unstructured, distractible platform.
Yeah.